we're absolutely thrilled to have you here. I know some of the things that's happening with SAS and AI because of Pat Brown,
Of course.
one of our alums, general counsel at SAS,
Yes.
And on our board for Institute of Innovation. But I don't hear as much about sort of what SAS is doing in the areas of agency and leadership and responsibility and the way that we should be thinking about how we're going to use AI. So really, thank you.
Of course.
You for coming for that.
My pleasure.
One of the questions I have is, look, part of it was about we set our own narrative and we should set a good narrative instead of a bad narrative, sort of. But we can't trust everyone to adopt that narrative. And you talked about how we should disseminate that narrative and sort of we have to convince people over time a little bit, it sounds like. But sometimes that takes too long and we use law when things are taking too long. So do you have any thoughts about what kinds of laws might be enacted in order to make AI used more responsibly?
Big question. Yes, I have some thoughts. Now, let me put the challenge on the table first, which is the proverbial innovate versus regulate conversation, right? I tend to believe that regulation should follow innovation as it typically does, as a consequence of inertia or just we're still discovering that sort of thing. However, I think when you can foreseeably expect harms is the time to act. And I think we're at that point in time with AI. And it's not to say that you can put the proverbial guardrails around a technology, but what you can do is anticipate the application of the technology and you can guardrail that application. So for example, if we know that we can foresee AI being used in ways that are distorting imagery, distorting your name, image, and likeness, it can be used in ways that are potentially harmful to children. Like in fact, I think we have a responsibility, quite frankly, to do something about those sorts of very foreseeable harms. And I think we're there. The prevailing AI law today is the EU AI Act. I'm sure you're familiar. And I only say prevailing insofar as the comprehensiveness that act is composed of. Now, we can certainly have a lot of questions about the effectiveness of the act. Was it premature? Is it enforceable? All of those are legitimate questions. But I think one thing we cannot question is that it started with this idea of understanding harms that can be mitigated. And to the extent that that is the impetus, then I certainly applaud the effort. Conversely, we can look around the globe and you see some people who have adopted similar kinds of legal postures. But here in the U.S., so we can just localize for a second, we've not. And I think it's time for us to do something. And I think we've got to, quite frankly, muster up the political courage to do something. And we've got to be truly objective, truly with an eye toward the benefit for all Americans. And I hope that we get there. It will be a challenge, but I think that ought to be the goal.
Yeah. It's a good goal. It's good to see role models in space like AI, especially when something's new and you say like, well, how should we be doing this? What should we aspire to? I think of what you're doing, what SAS is doing is a good role model. Or the other areas that you'd be looking, other entities that you'd say like, look, this is really good, responsible, forward-looking ways of using AI or approaching AI that the rest of the world could be looking to as role models.
Yeah, well, look, I think that AI as a broad topic has been used in a number of different places for lots of years. When we think about AI from a deterministic perspective, all the predictive analytics stuff and so on. Most of that is back office work that people don't get a chance to see nor react to. Now, we can have a conversation about appropriate levels of transparency for sure. I think by and large, there's nothing wrong going on there. the conversation about AI today largely is a conversation about the best and appropriate place for the generative AI that we are now seeing, and whether or not it is appropriate to use in certain settings versus others, right? Because of the probabilistic nature of or non-deterministic nature of it. What I'm resisting right now is just wholesale throwing certain kinds of firms under the bus, right? Because I don't think it's deserved. I think you can objectively say that there's work that, let's say, Anthropic is doing that is respectable work that we should understand and learn more from. Same with OpenAI, same with Google, just in the generative AI space. That does not mean that everything that they do is golden, right? And I would imagine with an objective view of SaaS, some would probably say the same. But for me, that seems to be a part of existence. You know, you don't do everything well. But importantly, and this may be the part that's missing, is we think at SaaS in terms of data ethics principles, one of which is accountability. And the conversation around accountability really has to do with exposing oneself or organization at a sufficient level of transparency in order to be held accountable for when we're not golden. And importantly, being prepared to do something different if and when that occurs. But I think all too often, there's a lot of hubris in our cultural conversation today. And it seems to be a lack of willingness to say, my bad. You know what I mean? Like, just, I had a certain intent, but I had a different impact, and therefore I am going to do something different as a consequence. I'd like to think that we're the kind of organization that has proven itself to have enough humility to say, that wasn't the best thing. So let us remediate and try a different way. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's a leadership matter. This is not just a technology conversation at this point. We're talking about character.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we all want to feel some level of assurance that the people who are telling the story, as I talked about earlier, that are narrating this AI story, are operating with the kind of character that we raise our kids to have.
Well, that sounds like the story of business, story of life. It's just maybe the stakes are a little higher right now. Hey, this has been great. Thank you so much.
You got it. Thanks, Steve.